It's a wild time to be alive in Tuscaloosa, Alabama right now. We talked about Kalen DeBoer and the staff he's putting together right now. He's also, right now, recruiting pretty heavily, obviously at the high school level. I'm sure he's going to make some recruitments via the portal. He's also trying to keep his guys on the roster right now from jumping into the portal. And a name that started to surface yesterday in terms of some smoke around the portal or some smoke around having no decision just yet on the transfer portal is a one Caleb Downs. Now, Caleb Downs, I wholeheartedly believe, is the best player on Alabama's roster. And I want to start with this disclaimer. We would not be discussing the potential of Caleb Downs entering the portal if there wasn't a report on this right now, right? Like usually we don't speculate. Usually we don't do the whole thing of, oh, well, they might jump in the portal now because their head coach changed. Like we just wait for a name to pop up or for a name to pop up on a Hayes Fawcett graphic of announced his intentions to or will enter or has entered or whatever. But Tom Van Haren from ESPN put out a tweet that says that Caleb Downs is currently undecided or hasn't made a decision on his future yet if he'll stay or transfer. The tweet also says he'd like to see who's added to Alabama's defensive staff, but very likely could make a decision either way by Tuesday. Travaris Robinson staying at Georgia factors into that equation. Okay, so that's why we're talking about this. The reason why we got some conversation around this now is because there's a report. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a minute of what we got going on right here. Transfer portal, college football. It's junkie season. Want y'all dialed in, so appreciate y'all in advance for that. So the tweet said he'd like to see who's added to Alabama staff. That's the report. Kane Womack is going to be the next DC at Alabama. So now your eyes go to Caleb Downs and see what he's doing. So we're watching the socials pretty closely there for any decision that we could get or may get. The fact that Travaris Robinson factors into this thing I think is interesting. Because the finalists for Caleb Downs out of high school were Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State. I still remember like it was yesterday being at the Ohio State-Michigan game and Caleb Downs popping up for a surprise visit in Columbus when he was in high school, and that obviously made waves in Columbus. They were excited about that. But let's kind of reset this whole conversation around Caleb Downs and the portal. There's going to be some people that see that report and say, well, why? Why are we even talking about this? Caleb Downs has a spot locked up at Alabama. Alabama has a tremendous history of putting guys in the league. Nick Saban's still going to be in the stadium right across the way. Like he still has access to the GOAT. Like why would you leave? The reason why there's some layers to this is yes, players commit to a logo and yes, players commit to the development of a staff and all that. But I would say more specifically, people commit to people. Caleb Downs out of high school committed to Nick Saban, and Travaris Robinson was a very big part of his recruitment. He took a job as the co-DC at Georgia. Okay, Alabama tried to bring him back. It sounded like there was an offer on the table for him to be the DC. Ended up saying, you know what, I appreciate y'all. I'm going to stay at Georgia. So to put that simply, like Travaris Robinson, that was Caleb Downs' guy. So the fact that Nick Saban's not there anymore, Travaris Robinson isn't there anymore, the situation that Caleb Downs committed to out of high school that got him to Alabama, that's changed. So with that being the case, we'll see what he does. I don't want to speculate too specifically here. But if he were to leave, there's multiple levels of impact here. And the first level is pretty obvious. Dude's a ball player, right? I said at the top of this segment, I think he's the best player on Alabama's roster. I don't care about his age. I think he was the best player on Alabama's roster a season ago. That's how talented he is. Real deal special. I mean, for Nick Saban to mention him in a sit-down interview with Reese Davis as one of the players that's made it tough for him to retire, a player that was tough for him to tell that he was retiring, like, y'all, that means something. The GOAT's been around a lot of players, and for him to put a true freshman in his secondary, the position group that is Nick Saban's baby, that means something. That should hold some weight. So one, dude's a ball player. Other level of impact here, Caleb Downs, to me, from the outside looking in, is one of those guys that sets the temperature of a room. And we've all been around people like this. There's some people that walk into a room and they are the thermostat. Like Caleb Downs is a course-setting kind of player. So if he were to leave, I think it would just provide a lot of uneasiness internally. Now, again, I'm speculating here, but I think that's the impact it would have. At the very least, you're asking, well, why is Alabama's best player transferring out? Does he not trust the direction of the program? Does he not feel good about his development? Like, a bunch of other questions arise. And I'm not here to say those are fair or unfair, but that's, I think, the potential ripple effect. And so whether you're on that roster or whether you're on that staff or whether you're a fan, it kind of perks your antenna up a little bit and say, okay, a guy who does everything right, a guy who Nick Saban said was difficult for him to tell he was retiring to, a guy who's held in this really high regard, is leaving Alabama. What does that say about the direction of this thing? Now, I'm not telling you it does or doesn't. I'm just saying that's the ripple effect and the narrative that would start to exist. Now, if he stays, I think it works both ways. Say, okay, hey, we got some change here, but Caleb Downs, a dude who has everything at stake, a dude who's probably going to be a first-round draft pick when it's his time to declare for the NFL, like, he's staying, he's down with Kalen DeBoer, all right. Good enough for Caleb, it's good enough for us. I don't know if it's that black and white, but you hear the sentiment I'm saying here. He's a guy that also, as much as him leaving would provide some uneasiness, I think him staying could provide some stability. So I think it works both ways, but if he did enter the transfer portal, if he did leave, the obvious conversation we have to have here is where would he go? And the fact that Travaris Robinson is cited in that report from Tom Van Haren of ESPN probably means something. A guy who's at Georgia right now, a guy who would be Caleb Downs' position coach should he go to Georgia. Caleb Downs from the state of Georgia. Like, there's a lot of smoke around Georgia. Ohio State was also, again, a hat that was on the table for Caleb Downs, metaphorically speaking, when it came to his decision. If he went to Georgia, the obvious gut punch would be there because you already lost Travaris Robinson to the Dogs. If you lost Caleb Downs to Georgia, the team that's your rival at the top of the SEC, a team that you beat for the SEC championship last year, that'd be the obvious gut punch. And the thing with this, too, is like the margins are so razor thin at the top of the SEC. Losing your best player would chip away at those margins. So I'm not here to tell you that Caleb Downs, if he did leave Alabama, Alabama would go into a tailspin and wouldn't repeat it as SEC champs. I'm not saying that, but I think there is some pretty solid impact and something very real to watch here by nature of this report as to Caleb Downs and his future. So again, we would not talk about this if there wasn't a concrete report out there, full disclaimer, but we're excited to see what happens, and we're very, very heavily on Caleb Down watch here, and we'll let you know as soon as we get something concrete, and we'll have a reaction for you in a very orderly fashion. Hey y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.